Hello everyone, I am Abdul Rehman on my podcast channel Kiran Neuropsychology. Today I am accompanied with a very senior and a humble Jungian scholar. She is the author and speaker. She was also the professor at the Central University of Florida and also the instructor at Young Center in Florida. She is the author of four books, which includes The Bridge to Wholeness, A Feminine Alternative to Hero Myth. It was also nominated for Benjamin Franklin Award. Other than that is The Dream Theaters of the Soul and Healing the Sacred Divide, and the last, The Soul's Twins. Thank you, Jean, for joining me today on the podcast.
Thank you. I'm very glad to be here.
So today our topic is archetypal foundations of psyche, the five major archetypes: shadow, anima, animus, ego, persona, and self. So I would like Jean to please enlighten our audience with the first one.
Okay. Your psyche has a conscious self and it has an unconscious self.
Mm-hmm.
And in your conscious self, the center of your consciousness is called your ego. And that's the part of you that simply you think of as who you are.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all about you know what you think, you know what you feel, you know what you want to do. Meanwhile, you have an unconscious self you're not aware of. So your ego is the center of your consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
And so it is the part of you that decides that you're aware of, decides what you want to do and where you want to go.
Uh-huh. So how does it differs from the Freudian ego, or is it almost the same?
I think the ego meant the same thing to Freud and Jung. It was just essentially everything you know about yourself and everything you believe about yourself and everything.
Like a central dot of consciousness.
Yeah.
So I have also read somewhere that like in the dreams, when a person do something or feels something in the dream, that's the ego. So what we are supposed to do for the self growth would be opposite to that, what we actually do in the dream.
Not necessarily, no. Your dream ego is the you in the dream.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it does things that you would not normally do. And in that case, yes, it might be the opposite. But sometimes it can show you the way that you respond to situations. And for example, you might be walking down the street and meet somebody you know,
Mm-hmm.
and you might be glad to see them.
You know about like the Jungian analyst John Beebe, right? Who
Yes.
so his approach is very different from all other Jungian analysts because he considered anima animus very differently, and also the opposing personality. He links too much with the personality types. So he says that what you see in the dream is actually your ego. What you do in the dream is your ego. So basically, unconscious always guides or sends a message from the self, right? So how come if a man or a woman needs to integrate something from unconscious, he would rely on the dream by just witnessing the situation, what they are doing in that, because that would be the totally opposite they're supposed to do. Let's say I am I'm on the top floor of the house. Usually the top floor symbolizes spirituality, wisdom, or higher consciousness, but that's my ego there. So how it would be in real life integrating that? So that was almost the question.
Well, it would sort of depend on what the difference is between your waking life and your dream life. Sometimes your dream ego
Mm-hmm.
reacts. Sometimes your dream ego reacts in ways you would normally act in waking life. But there are other times, for example, if I'm driving the car and my friends are in the back seat and they're going to go in and rob a bank,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm sitting out here thinking, oh, they've got to hurry, come back, and I need to get out of here. And I would wake up and I would be appalled at myself. My waking ego would think, oh my gosh, why was I driving a car for bank robbers? I would never do that in my waking life. And in my dream, I did. But at other times, my dream ego might be doing something that I would normally be doing in waking life, but the other circumstances of the dream combine to make it look as if that might have a deeper meaning. For example, Carl Jung had a dream in which he was standing at the bottom of beneath a bridge, and there was one of his patients at the top of the bridge looking down at him. And here he was down there looking up at her in the dream. When he woke up, his waking ego said, wait, I don't look up to her, I look down on her. So in that case, the dream reversed the circumstances of his waking life attitude.
That makes it more clear. I think that this answers the question. So I think it would be like, I read it somewhere in the Jung's book saying that dreams offer compensate for our conscious life. I mean,
That's it.
right?
Yes,
Yes.
that's it.
So maybe in a conscious life, I am like feeling too much low self-esteem. So in the dream, I might be traveling in the elevator, moving up, something like that maybe. So sometimes I am very inflated. I have an inflated ego in the conscious life, and it would be opposite to that in the dream life to compensate that maybe.
Yes. In that case, that's very true.
Yeah. So that really clears the question. So let's move towards the next part, persona.
All right. Okay, the persona is your social mask. This is the way you want to appear to the world. So when you're a young child and you start developing a sense of who you are and who you want to be and what you should be like and what people want to see and what you want to show the world, you begin to decide, okay, if I'm funny, people will laugh and that makes me feel good. So I'm going to really try to be more funny when I'm around people. And they like it when I make jokes. And so that's what I want to be. I want to be funny. So the ego sort of decides to form a persona, a social mask as it grows up. Or your ego might decide to become a very serious, scholarly person or to appear very loving and friendly. In other words, your persona is whatever image you want to convey to other people. Meanwhile, there's a whole lot of other aspects of yourself that you are not showing the world. You're just showing them your social mask. And that might show up in a dream as you going through your closet and looking for the kinds of clothes you want to wear before you go out and do something special. Or it might show up in a dream as you standing on a stage because you're going to be in a play and you've forgotten your lines. And you're very, very anxious because you think, oh no, what will people think of me? I've forgotten my lines. I'm going to look like a fool. That's a persona dream. It's a dream in which you're worried about your social image.
So just like as you said that I'll be in a room opening the closet searching for the clothes, so that would be just like the same getting on the persona, getting on the mask.
Yeah. Clothes are symbols of your persona. Clothes are something that you cover yourself up with. And so wearing clothes or looking for clothes or making sure you have on the right clothes is about how you want to appear in public. It's about your persona. But there are always other parts of you. You have to remember that. The ego tends to identify with its persona. It thinks this is who I am. And it can forget that it's a whole lot more than just that social mask.
That's true. That's impressive. So, like the stronger the persona gets adapted with the conscious ego, the person gets far away from the self or the unconscious. So, does that lead to cognitive dissonance at some point?
It does for many people. There are many people who get to a point, often around midlife, when they say, wait a minute, I'm tired of acting like this.
Mm-hmm.
I'm attracting certain kinds of people. What's wrong with me? And so the ego begins to question their social mask or their persona. They don't realize that's what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
They're just thinking they're not happy and wondering why. And that does create cognitive dissonance when you begin to question how your social interactions are going and wonder what's wrong with you.
Mm-hmm. Great. I think that clears a lot. I had some dreams like that, so it even clears my question and all my dreams too. Thank you for that. So
You're welcome.
the next one is shadow. I believe the most avoided thing in Jungian psychology and among people.
Yes, and this is really the most important thing for anybody who wants to go deeper into themselves to acquire self-knowledge. You cannot get there unless you're willing to face your shadow first.
Mm-hmm.
Your shadow is kind of a center of your personal unconscious, and it is like the ego's dark twin in a way. And everything that your ego thinks it knows about yourself and wants to be, this is the opposite of that. The shadow is the dark side of all the things you think you are. And there's not just darkness in your shadow.
Mm-hmm.
It's also the rich, wonderful treasures, the wonderful aspects of your personality that you've neglected or rejected when you were a child because somebody made fun of your creativity or your singing voice or the way you wrote. And so then you said, well, I'm not a writer and I'm not a singer. And then you don't try anymore, and you think you can't be those things, but you've always wanted to do some of those things. And so sometimes the fact that you've rejected those things into your shadow creates a lot of longing in your ego, and you don't know why. And it's because you either have parts of yourself that you don't like,
Mm-hmm.
that you want to get rid of, or you want to fix somehow, or you have wonderful, positive things about yourself that you always wanted to develop but never have because you repressed them when you were a child. And so it can be good and bad things about you.
Mm-hmm.
But it's very powerful. Either way, it is an obstacle to deeper work until you come to terms with what your shadow really is.
I see. So is it possible that someone else's persona might be a shadow for us?
Yes. That, in fact, is a very good way to discover your shadow.
Mm-hmm.
When you come across somebody whose personality, whose persona is, it puts you off. You don't like it. And
Mm-hmm.
you don't know why other people like this person, but you don't like this person. That's because there's something about that person that unconsciously reminds you of an aspect of yourself that you don't like.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. So one way to find out what some of the qualities of your shadow are would be to list 5 people you know or people you have seen on television. Mm-hmm. And list the qualities of these people that you do not like, people that you don't know and you don't like, to list their qualities and then say, what is it that I don't like about these people? I once had a woman in a dream group who said she dreamed about a very controlling person and she just did not like that controlling person. Well, that was an aspect of her own shadow and she didn't know it, but she was very controlling. And she couldn't admit it. And until she could admit that she was not going to go any further, because once you refuse to admit things about that are true of you, there's no way you can get past that until you admit it and befriend it.
That's true. I believe acceptance is the first step towards change. That's true.
Exactly.
So how does people, how does shadow possession have an impact on people's life?
Well, let's say you had a very lonely childhood,
mm-hmm.
and you felt very sorry for yourself, but you said to yourself, well, I'm going to be strong and I'm going to be brave and I'm not going to be feeling sorry for myself. I'm going to be a very tough and strong person. So you don't want to admit to the fact that you felt sorry for yourself and were
Mm-hmm.
sad. So you grow up telling yourself, I'm going to be strong. I'm going to be a warrior. And you start wearing a tough guy persona of being a strong warrior. You can't hurt me. And meanwhile, there's this part of you that feels very sorry for yourself. And sometimes that part of you, the shadow that you have rejected, that little child that has felt lonely, will come out in your emotions and your behavior. And you might be overly touchy or get overly hurt when people talk to you and say something that they thought was harmless, but it reminds you of your loneliness as a child, and you overreact. And so your shadow can cause you to overreact and be touchy to other people, to get really defensive and say, no, I'm not like that, when you really are. Because if you can't admit that you're like that, then you will respond to other people in ways that are off-putting to them. So you have to be able to see your shadow, and you have to say, yep, I dreamed about a little orphan the other day, and there's a part of me like that sad little orphan, and I guess I'd better accept it, so that the next time somebody makes me feel like that, makes me feel sad, I can say, oh, here comes my little orphan. She's feeling very sorry for herself. And if I can see that, I won't overreact to when people make me feel that way.
That's great. I believe the society or the people around us impact a lot in that case, because I believe it's the demand around us which compels us to be strong, maybe, because that's what people wear the mask. Because I have seen people around, or even myself, that we are raised in such a way that we need to be strong as men. We need to be very progressive and something like that. So the more we do that, and the less we integrate our shadow of the weaker side. And so maybe that's the point where it gets possessed at some point in life.
Yeah. You can be overwhelmed with sad emotions that you have repressed for years because you've been so tough, and you've been telling yourself you had to be tough and strong and brave. And then you find yourself feeling like you want to cry and you don't know what's the matter, and you're overwhelmed with these emotions. And a lot of people, men especially, when they're feeling strong emotional feelings like that, react in anger. And so anger is a secondary emotion that sometimes comes up when the shadow beneath it, the sad feelings, different feelings, or the fear beneath it, when that fear, when your ego feels that fear or it feels that pain, it can get really angry, because that's a good, easy way to deflect your fear and your pain, and to tell yourself that I'm strong, and to think that you're showing other people that you're strong.
I believe that would be a very important point for the listeners as well, that anger is mostly, maybe not always, but mostly the secondary emotion. And there's always the underlying hurt, or maybe a shadow that's willing to expose, but the conscious ego always covers it with anger, aggression, something very dominant.
It often does cover it with anger.
Yeah.
Or defensiveness, or just simple rejection, or cutting off a relationship, or unwilling to listen to other people. When people show you your shadow, it causes your ego real problems. Your ego doesn't like to see its own shadow, and it doesn't want to admit to it, and it's very difficult.
I have a quick question. I believe trickster archetype that destroys people's shadow. What do you think about that? Because like the comedians and people like that, they are really good at just destroying the persona and showing people their shadow.
That's true. Comedians have a really good way with humor to joke about people's shadows, and that humor lightens up the situations and can make it easier for people to accept their dark sides, their shadows. Yes, that's very true.
Great. So I believe that's pretty much clear about the shadow. And The next one is Anima, Animus. There are a lot of doubts among people about that. So I would love if you could explain on that one.
There are, when Carl Jung came up with his theories, it was about 100 years ago from now when he came up with the anima and animus. In classical Jungian psychology, the anima is a man's feminine side. And because in the society he grew up in, there was a very strict and rigid difference between what men were supposed to be and think and what women were supposed to be and think. Very sharp role divisions and very clear distinctions about what men and women could and could not do. So the cultural pressure to conform to those stereotypes was very, very strong. And so he assumed then, given the psychological situation of his times, that a man had a hidden feminine side and that he needed to get in touch with it because it was his soul. Mm-hmm. And only by being in touch with his feminine side could he balance his masculine side. Well, he was right about that. Mm-hmm. But what a lot of people think today is that he also has some unconscious masculinity as well. He also has parts of his animus, parts of the animus. But in Jungian psychology in those days, only a woman had an animus and only a man had an anima, or a feminine side. But really, today, neo-Jungians, I tend not to use anima and animus anymore because it does confuse people, because they think, they think, well, I mean, I'm a woman and I have a feminine side and I know a lot of my feminine side. Some of it's good, but not all the women in my dreams are negative. They're not all shadow. Some of them are very positive. Isn't that my feminine soul? Aren't the negative women in my dreams my shadow of my feminine side? But I also have a masculine side, and I have positive males in my dreams and positive and negative males in my dreams. So I tend to think of us as having everybody having a masculine and a feminine side, both consciously and unconsciously. But the aspects of masculinity and femininity that we don't want to own or accept in ourselves, we repress those. Some are positive and some are negative. But again, back to classical Jungian psychology, anima is a man's feminine side and animus is a woman's masculine side. That's the classical version. I don't really quite see it that way anymore, but still, I do have a masculine and a feminine unconscious. So that part is very true. I just don't give them that definition anymore.
I believe sticking too much to anima and animus eliminates one of the masculine or feminine in men and women. How? Let me explain. Because if we are too much focused on integrating the anima, men might develop too much of the feminine side and at the expense of masculine, and females might develop too much of masculine at the expense of feminine. Don't you think that would happen when you restrict too much with these words?
Well, it's these words and it's this cultural stereotypes that make that happen. It's if I think my animus is all negative masculinity, then what about my positive masculinity? Or how about if I decide that I want to be like all the men, and men is not the same thing as masculine qualities. Males, I'm trying to get away from gender here, and my newest book is about getting rid of this very stereotypical way of thinking, so that I can see that I have a masculine side and a feminine side, and I won't go too far in either direction, because I think everybody has their own space in a continuum between total masculine qualities, whatever they are, and that differs from culture to culture, and total feminine qualities. And everybody's somewhere in between, and it doesn't really matter which qualities you have, as long as you're being true to who you really are and not trying to be something that you're not.
That's true. So, how does the like the anima possession in term can we relate anima to eros, or they both would be different?
Well, there you go. There, you're asking all the tough questions. Eros in Jung's classical psychology meant the function of relationship and caring for others. And he associated that with the anima.
The feminine.
Yes, the feminine. I would say, yes, I would associate it with the feminine, but not with all women. And I would associate it with the feminine principle or your feminine drive.
Exactly, not just gender oriented. That's true.
It's not just about gender. So is anima the same as eros? It was for Jung. For me, I think I just call it my feminine side. Is about relationship. It is about love. It is about caring. It's about having feelings, being able to feel my emotions and having strong values that are important to me and paying attention to these. It's the anima is all those kinds of things. And the animus I would see as my masculine side. And all the qualities that in my culture are associated with masculinity. In our culture, we see masculine tough, feminine weak, masculine hard, feminine soft, masculine active, feminine passive. And a lot of cultures see things the same way. I don't look at them like that. I see that we have a drive for species preservation that I think of as our feminine side. And that is the relational, caring, feeling, being part of me. And I think we have women have strength, the feminine has strength. She sometimes can be very tough. My feminine side, your feminine side, she is just, it's so hard to separate cultural expectations from the real qualities we all have that are some feminine and some masculine. For example, in Tibetan Buddhism, wisdom is considered a feminine quality and compassion is considered a masculine quality. Now, in our culture, it's the other way around. We see compassion as a feminine quality and wisdom as a masculine quality. I'm saying our as in Eastern, excuse me, as in the West. So the point is that everybody has both of these. They have the potential for both of these. And so it doesn't really matter whether you associate them with masculinity or femininity, but if you do, please don't associate them with gender.
Yeah, that's true, because it really cleared my perspective on anima, animus, because the classical Jungian psychology really differs from, as you said, the neo-Jungians. They really differs. Like even James Hillman, his perspective over such things was really different. So it's really good to know that perspective, because it really helped me, and I hope so that it would help the audience too. So I have one more question over anima, animus. That was like considering the personality types, there's also there are two anima possessions, like the anima possession in terms of feminine and the other is inferior function. I also saw that reading Jung's one of the book. So does that really happen, or how can we relate that? I mean, anima possession in terms of inferior function?
Well, are you talking inferior psychological type function, or?
Yes.
Yeah, well, now we're getting into the psychological type. I can say that, and I don't know as much about that right now, but I can say that an anima possession, in Jung's view, was simply when a man is so unwilling to admit to his feminine side, that he begins to act more and more like what was considered a negative female in his society, in his culture.
Mm-hmm.
It was his whole culture rejected certain aspects of femininity. And so if he rejected them, then he could get overwhelmed by them and start acting like what their culture would have thought of as a negative kind of a woman.
Mm-hmm.
And so it depends on what your culture, again, associates with femininity. But I think you can be overwhelmed or sort of possessed in a way by any aspects of your shadow.
That's true. Mm-hmm.
And not just feminine ones. So I don't worry too much about the gender of the shadow that's possessing me. I just feel like I'm overwhelmed by some unconscious emotion that has to do with my shadow, and I want to find out what it is.
I believe that helps more because it's the underlying emotion that needs to be exposed. Because I don't think so. When we focus too more on the gender, that would help us a lot. So I have one more question. Sorry about that. With Anima, animus, and like the mother complex, like you could say that overdevelopment of feminine in the male, like Jainism or homosexuality, would that be same like anima possession?
I don't know. I don't know that I would know Jung's position on that. I know that almost every child has some kind of a mother complex.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that a mother complex doesn't necessarily have to possess you or make you too feminine. I don't think that's the case. I just think a mother complex could be any number of things. That maybe your idea of a good mother was that she would be there and take care of your every want and need, and she couldn't do that because she was busy and working. And so you don't like women who aren't very sweet and kind and gentle to you and who won't wait on you or something like that. That could be part of a mother complex. But I don't know if that's the same thing as anima possession. Again, I don't worry about those terms so much. I just want to get to the bottom of why I'm feeling this way about women and how I can get through to that part of me and kind of develop a relationship with it. Find out what is this feeling in me that feels feminine to me. What is it? How does it make me feel? When does it show up? How does it show up in my dreams? When do I feel that way in waking life? How does that relate to my mother? How does that relate to my relationships with other women? So the women in your dreams can show you about your relationships to your mother and to other women. And I know a lot of men have a lot of questions about anima and anima possession. And I think there are some psychologists who really specialize in those and who might be able to give more detailed help with that specific issue if in a long-term kind of a relationship with somebody, when they begin to understand all the other factors involved.
I believe actually getting into the bottom, you answered many of the questions which actually I had from myself and from other people. So actually answered quite a lot of answers, actually most of them.
Good.
So it really helped. Thank you. So let's move towards the next, last but not the least.
Okay. No, and not the least for sure. Beneath your personal unconscious is what Jung called the collective unconscious. And this means the self contains all the fundamental archetypes that every human being is furnished with at birth. And the self is both the core of you. It's like your spiritual core. Jung called the self your God image or your religious function. So it is at your core. It is the heart of your soul's connection here on earth with spirit, really. And he also said that the self is the circumference of your psyche. In other words, it encompasses everything about you, and not just your personal consciousness and not just your personal unconscious, but it also encompasses all the archetypes that all of humanity have been furnished with from birth. And those deeper archetypes are not things that you and I can normally get easily in touch with.
Above personal unconscious, they're like at the collective unconscious.
They're connected to the collective unconscious. The archetypes are essentially in the collective unconscious, but your personal unconscious can get in touch with them. But for you to get in touch with them, your ego has to first get in touch with your shadow, and then your anima and animus, and accept all those opposites in yourself. And then you have to begin. That's when you begin to find personal spiritual meaning, and that's when you begin to sense the sameness deep in the foundation of all humanity, the similarities in all of our psyches. When you get to that point that you're carrying on a dialogue with the self, and Jung called that the transcendent function. It's like your ego self is going into your conscious every night, listening to your dreams, and you're getting dreams from the self, from the collective unconscious that are going into your unconscious. So your unconscious there is that place where your ego is meeting your unconscious contents, and the self is sending you hints about your unconscious self and about spirit as well. And so the self is a spiritual core, and it is, as I say, I believe it's our connection with spirit.
Great. So here comes a question, like for the archetypes from the collective unconscious to manifest in dreams, do they need to have all the qualities of that archetype so that they can be identified through dreams? How would that work?
Yeah. And the answer is no. I said yeah because I understood what you were saying. You don't have to get in touch with all of. You can't. Nobody knows what all the archetypes qualities are. My newest book talks about 4 masculine and 4 feminine archetypes, like mother, father, lover, beloved, and so on, that are traditionally thought of as aspects of our feminine drives and our masculine drives, and that everybody has both. But nobody knows the exact nature and all the specific qualities of each one. So, and there's no one dream that can tell you everything you want to know about any of your archetypes. So I've been keeping my dreams for 30 years. I write them down, 31 now. I write them down. I wake up in the morning and I work on them if I have time, and I work on most of my dreams nowadays to try to see, could this character, it makes me think about my father. Maybe that has something to do with my father archetype. But it's your ego has to be so in touch with your inner life to be able to figure any of this out. It takes a lot of inner work, and the gains that you make in understanding about your anima and your mother archetypes and your mother complex are generally very tiny. It really depends on how much time your ego is willing to devote to looking within and trying to understand the symbolism and the characters in your dreams. So it's a very slow process, and I figure it's going to take me the rest of my life, and I still won't be done. I'm still working very hard to understand the archetypes within myself, and I feel like I've barely scratched the surface, but it's worth it.
That's true. It's worth it. That's true.
So worth it. The rewards are self-validating. Every hint you get, and then you see yourself act in a certain way the next day, and you know, oh my gosh, that just came from my mother complex. You know, I wouldn't have known that 10 years ago, but I can see it now. You know, and so the point of this inner work is to keep at it. And for me, dreams are my source of information about my unconscious, my primary source. And my relationships, of course, are my primary source as well. But these five parts of me, ego, persona, shadow, anima, animus, and self, are real parts of me, and they're real parts of everybody. And if I have this framework to work with, I can begin to understand more about the archetypes. And that part, the archetypal understanding, is longer in coming, and will be an adventure for the rest of your life.
That's true. They're not even easy to interpret it in the dreams as well.
No.
It's very difficult.
They are. And I don't think we have to do that. I mean, I think we need to keep working on our shadows, keep working on what information and images our dreams send us, and just try to see how those things that we're seeing in our dreams are playing out in our waking lives. And if we can start making connections like that, we are doing the work. And the transcendent function is at work in us. And the more we do that, the more self-knowledge we will acquire. It's a matter of perseverance.
So I have a question here from your book, I believe, which is coming in October. So on the title, it says that think psychologically, live spiritually. It was actually very, very fascinating for me. So let's say that if we just get too much focused on personal unconscious, not integrating much of the collective unconscious, how do we get to the spiritual realms? Like, how do we get in touch with the spiritual aspect? Because that would be at the collective level.
Yes, it happens by itself. You can't make it happen. You can do all the praying and worshiping and good deeds that you're capable of doing, and that's a wonderful, good thing. But you have to commit yourself to learning how to love, I believe. And if I commit myself to learning how to love every person, every part of myself, every situation that I come up against, and be present with it and try to face it instead of running from it or hiding from it. If I do that every day, if I work on my dreams as much as I can, it's the ongoing work of my relationship with the self that I've established through dreamwork that will cause this spiritual transformation to occur within me. I cannot force it to happen by willing it to happen with my ego. I can do the work, and the work will go on unbeknown to me in my unconscious, and I will change gradually, and my outlook and behavior will become more and more spiritual as I mature in self-knowledge. So self-growth goes straight along with spiritual growth, and I don't believe you can have one without the other. So I believe you have to think psychologically, and that's how you begin to learn to live spiritually.
That's true. That's actually wholeness. Thinking psychologically and living spiritually. That's true wholeness. And it actually fascinated me a lot. That the title. I would love to read the book when it would be.
Well, that's not the title of my book. Think psychologically and live spiritually, though.
No, it's like the soul twins. Yeah, I know, but it's just it was written down there.
Oh, I see. Yeah, the book, The Soul's Twins.
Yeah.
The subtitle is Emancipate Your Feminine and Masculine Archetypes.
Exactly. Yep.
And think psychologically and live spiritually is kind of the words that I have to describe my motto on my blog and in all of my writing. I always do say that. So it would be easy. I understand where you're coming from. You're saying you have seen me have that in my written materials, and you have. That's my saying. It's the way I live. It's the way I want to be. I want to think psychologically and live spiritually. And I write about that in all my books, and especially in The Soul's Twins. It's about that as well.
It actually is really fascinating. So I have one last question. How does an animus possessed woman would look like, and how does a anima possessed man would look like? Because all my friends, everyone around me have that question around in their mind. So they would love to listen that.
Um, well, according to classic Jungian psychology, the the woman who is driven by her animus acts like a know-it-all man, acts bossy and tough and strong, and she has strong opinions,
Mhm.
and and she's in an offensive, annoying way. I mean,
Uh-huh.
there's nothing wrong with a woman being strong. There's nothing wrong with a man being strong. But when
Mhm.
either person gets in your face with their attitudes and their opinions, that is generally an animus kind of a thing,
Which are very in a very offensive way.
in an offensive way. When
Mhm.
when when you are so opinionated that you can't listen to reason, when you're trying to dominate people, that's what males in our society do. And those are qualities associated with maleness.
Mhm.
So when women start acting in offensive ways like that, then in Jung's time that was called an animus-driven woman. On the other hand, in Jung's time, women were considered the ones with the gentler feelings and the kinder hearts and the more caring souls.
Mhm.
Well, today we know that just as many men have kind souls and caring hearts
Mhm.
as women, but in those days, the cultural restraints were so tight that they that men would block out their feeling sides and those tender feelings and the caring parts of themselves to try to act strong and brave and tough, and men who didn't do that, whose feminine sides broke through, might start out looking the opposite from all that, might start looking like weak women,
Mhm.
weak passive women. Well, the thing is, don't get too worried uh, about being like a girl, because it's not a gender thing. And
Mhm. Mhm.
because if
True.
you think of it as a gender thing, you start getting mad. If I were to blame all the men in the world for having a strong masculine side,
Mhm.
I would have an attitude and I wouldn't like men. But there are women with strong attitudes.
True.
And, and and I think we've got to both calm down on both sides. We have to both bring some balance to our feminine and masculine side. So yes, a man needs a soft and tender and gentle feminine side, and a woman needs a strong ability to know who she is and to assert herself and to claim her authority and to have a right to speak in her own voice. And that's true of both genders, and it's true of everybody.
That's great. I believe that that really answers all of the questions, because I had really many of the questions from my friends and from myself too. So it really, I'm really hoping that they would really love the answers and they would really love to hear everything in this podcast. So thank you so much, Jean, for joining me on the podcast. It was great talking to you and above all, learning from you.
It was a pleasure talking with you too, Abdul.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.